say it a bit like a geek.
We need an opening act so that things warm up a little bit. I'm sorry, I hope this is not on.
I think you can hear it.
Do you think we look like a comic duo?
Yeah, we can actually. We can try.
Have you got your plastic hammers on the twin?
I can pretend falling and you can tell stories. I'm just miming. Dan is not looking now. Dan? Yeah? So thank you all for being here tonight. This is the fourth visual culture lecture of our series. I'm Anne Dufaux, the special project coordinator here. And tonight we are pleased to welcome Mihnea Mircan. I will first say a few words about the series itself that Professor Juan Cruz, Dean of the School of Fine Arts, and myself are organizing. The Visual Culture Lecture Series enable us collectively to learn as we produce new knowledge. We use the lectures as a means of addressing questions pertinent to our understanding of fine art and its broader context today. Our guest speakers, distinguished artists, writers, curators, and academics, are carefully selected and invited to speak about their work in relation to a given line of inquiry. This season's series considers the question of contemporaneity framed as an investigation of this ephemeral and ungraspable concept, always to be redefined within the production, circulation, and reception of artist works. The series intends to produce a critical overview of what it means to produce culture today, giving an insight into the complex fabric of artist production. So Mihnea will present his latest project currently on show at Extra City in Antwerp, called Allegory of the Cave Painting, which will be on until December. I'm just going to say a few words of your biography. Mihnea Mircan is the artistic director of Extra City, Constal, Antwerp, where he has created a slowdown at the museum, Hans van Overlingen and Jonas Staal, the series Cross-Examination, and Jean-Luc Moulin and Words. In September 2014, he presented his long-term research project called Allegory of the Cave Painting, with an exhibition and the first volume of the accompanying reader in September 2014. Also, he created exhibitions at institutions, including the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Budapest, Museum in Bolzano, Stroom Den Haag in Den Haag, Spinnery in Leipzig, the David Roberts Art Foundation in London, and the Venice Biennale as the curator of the Romanian Pavilion in 2007. He was the editor of the book Hans van Overlingen, Undone in 2012, and has contributed in essays to monographs of Pavel Bochler, Nina Baer, Patrick Nielsen, and Remco Torenborg, and to the catalogue 6 Lines of Light. His writing also appeared in journals such as Mus, Manifesta Journal, and After All. And I just want to say thank you to This Is Tomorrow for live broadcasting the series as well. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you, Anne, for the kind introduction. Good evening, and thank you very much for coming. Thanks once again, Anne and Juan Cruz, for the very kind invitation to participate to this prestigious series and for your hospitality. I will speak about the Gion paintings in northwestern Australia, the prehistoric paintings that are the mental model, the departure point and terminus for the exhibition that Anne mentioned, Allegory of the Cave Painting, currently on view at Extra City Kunsthal in Antwerp. I will talk about their effect on conventional understandings of prehistoric art, on the ways in which we imagine our origins and destinations, as well as on my thinking as a curator of contemporary art. I will start with 2 fragments from a lecture that I downloaded from the Bradshaw Foundation website. Bradshaw is let's say the former name, and I'll get to that in a second, the former name that collectively describes these paintings. Gion is the new name employed by Australian archaeology. In spite of the pedagogical tenor and quite troubling colonial phrasings, these film fragments do function as a location shot, let's say, for what I would like to say. The Bradshaw Foundation looks after the paintings, or so its website states, even if, as you will see, these paintings are perfectly capable of looking after themselves. As a technical aside, as a warning, the word figurative is misused in the documentary. What is meant there is anthropomorphic. As opposed to Southern European counterparts, the Guion paintings depict almost exclusively human figures.
Europe has been well recorded, scientifically dated, and liberally interpreted, thus providing us with an invaluable insight into the psyche of its Ice Age artists. But the prominence of Europe has sometimes overshadowed the existence and importance of other ancient rock art. On the other side of the world, in a totally different world, lies another set of paintings that rivals Europe's finest. In the remote northwestern corner of Australia lie the Kimberley Ranges, home to the unique and exquisite rock art known as the Bradshaw paintings, or Guion. But despite their undisputed uniqueness and beauty, they remain enshrouded in mystery. At a time when most of Europe lay deep beneath the ice sheets, these paintings were created with a freshness and precision unseen anywhere else in the world. But who were the people who painted them? Where did they come from? When did they live? And what happened to them? The Kimberley region, roughly the size of Spain and larger than the state.
I'll find the second fragment.
Relatively recent, especially in the Kimberley. The survey inspired a subsequent expedition to the Kimberleys by Dr. Andreas Lommel in 1955. Accompanied by his wife and artist Katharina, their research of the paintings was carried out on behalf of the Natural History Museum in Munich, where most of Katharina's original paintings of the Bradshaws can still be seen. Lommel's work not only recorded the paintings themselves, but recorded many of the myths associated with the art. The common belief amongst the more traditional and now deceased elders of the West Kimberley was that the Bradshaw figures were the work of a little bird called Cujon, who lives in the rocks. Cujon is not considered a being from the Dreamtime, but a medium-sized grey and brown mottled bird still living in that area. He is said to peck his beak on the rock until it bleeds from the tip, and he then uses his beak tip to create the figures by applying his own blood. On occasions, Cujon is also claimed to have used one of his tail feathers to apply the blood and create such fine line work. To them, this myth serves to explain the surviving monochrome dark red colour of the Bradshaws, the fineness of line work and deftness of application. Moreover, it explains the depiction of some panels in very high and now totally inaccessible locations on cliff faces. If the Bradshaw paintings really are ancient, how can they have lasted for as long as they have? How can paint pigment be so resilient? With millennia of successive waves of scorching heat and wet periods, surely the exposed panels would suffer. One suggestion is that the paintings are so old that the soluble silica within the rock has evaporated to the rock surface, creating a skin of varnish. The paintings had literally become tattooed into the rock. Or is there another explanation? Perhaps the answer lies both in the canvas and the pigment. In recent experiments with sandstone fragments from Kimberley, the rock displays strong absorption when daubed with modern solvent-based ink, making the marks indelible. Had these early artists accidentally produced a pigment from native flora that has fortuitously turned out to be permanent? But as to who created this art and when, for now remains unanswered. But of this we can be sure. The Bradshaw paintings are a priceless and inalienable part of the Aboriginal people's culture, even if there is no clear ancestral tradition explaining them. They belong to every Aboriginal Australian's heritage, and arguably every white Australian's as well. When all is said and done, We are all immigrants.
The exhibition Allegory of the Cave Painting takes as pretext the findings of a study that is more recent than this e-lecture, a study that approached these images and the enigmas about their dating and their chromatic vividness from an angle that eschewed archaeological dead ends. A first report on the research led by Jack Pettigrew of Queensland University appeared in Antiquity, a quarterly review of world archaeology, at the end of 2010. That preliminary report states, the age of Bradshaw rock art, also called Gion, is uncertain but estimated by indirect methods at between 46,000 years ago, based on the time of extinction of depicted live megafauna, and 70,000 years ago, which is the age of the baobab tree in Australia. In view of this remarkable antiquity, it is remarkable that the Bradshaw paintings, often exposed to sun and rain, can be vivid and with high contrast, even though they have never been repainted. Conversely, other rock art in the same region, such as the Wandinja paintings, fades at a rate measured in hundreds of years and is often repainted. Here we report on cases where the original paint is no longer present in Bradshaw art, but has been replaced by a biofilm of living, pigmented microorganisms, whose natural replenishment may account for the longevity and vividness of these ancient paintings. Employing field microscopy and DNA sequencing, the study found that the Gion paintings had been colonized by red bacteria and black fungi, a biofilm of living pigments whose rejuvenation, cannibalizing on preceding generations, and symbiosis, an exchange of carbohydrates and water between the fungus and the bacteria, account for the painting's chromatic vivacity, in spite of drastic changes in temperature and humidity to which they are exposed. Bacteria and fungi co-produced a process of permanent self-painting while etching the pictures deeper into the rock. In conversation with Professor Pettigrew, he explained that the cyanobacteria erode the quartz wall in their photosynthesis by releasing ions so that the microorganisms preserve the integrity of the images, not only by reproducing in situ, but also by sculpting concave frames for the painted surface, painting, so to speak, the pictures deeper and deeper into the rock. At least 40,000 years old, anthropomorphic, alive, the Bradshaw Gion paintings maintain an idiosyncratic pictorial temporality, as they maintain an economy or ecology of signification. They are as much a product of prehistory, of a paradigm that bears life, knowledge, image, and world in ways we can only speculate upon, as they are made now in a radical contemporaneity. What they mean cannot be disentangled from what they are, from the chemical and static metabolism that regenerates the remarkably fine lines. Allegory of the Cave Painting takes these paintings as a mental model, or as elements that could construct one, as they disrupt our imagination of origins, scenarios where our ancestors toil at the entrances of caves and at the edges of intelligibility or identity. The Gion challenges a central archaeological metaphor, our inauguration, the inaugural moment of symbolic activity, an awakening where we begin and something that eludes us, that is fundamentally unfamiliar, ends. In other words, they perturb the ways in which modernity frames prehistory as an allegorical interlocutor, so that it can establish the descent from it that is both inevitable and cataclysmic, both a gestation and an eruption. This metaphorical machine obscures another continuum of zigzagging histories, forgotten technologies, ruptured lineages, and unintended outcomes. The Gion paintings lead three different lives. The youngest of these begins in 1891, when traveling through the Kimberley Range in search of suitable land for pastoral use, Joseph Bradshaw chanced upon a very distinctive family of silhouettes adorning often often inaccessibly high rock walls and shelters, and reported about his findings at the general meeting of the Royal Geographical Society of Australia. Ever since, Australian archaeology has had a fraught relationship to these paintings, one that resulted in a disorienting array of theories about their chronology and attribution. In claims of lineage that link the Gion directly to a succession of cultures, Phoenician, Chinese, Japanese, Hindu, or even Egyptian, assumed to have exported their image-making techniques to Australia. Among these discordant voices, the particularly influential Graham Walsh saw a discrepancy between the finesse of the art and the rudimentary population inhabiting the area, and suggested that authorship should be attributed to a superior pre-Aboriginal race, over which the current inhabitants of the area must have somehow prevailed. Walsh's work echoed the narrative of othering the paintings, defining them as what they are not, symbolically dislocating them from topography. The painting's second life unfolds alongside that of the communities that populate the area, the traditional custodians of the art. The Vorora and the Vanumbal weave around the paintings an intricate social and cultural geography and conceive them as landmarks in both their cosmology and their jurisprudence, in demands of territorial entitlement. For them, the Gion figures belong to a different class than the nearby Wandinja paintings. Stylistic traits differentiate them, but more importantly, so do rituals of visitation and repainting. The Gion are never repainted. There is no need for that, since the bird mentioned in the documentary attends to them. The third and oldest life of these paintings is one of permanent microbiological replenishment, maintaining intact an unknown intention, one that descends towards us from an inscrutable past. Who made them and when, and what precisely was their function? Were they based on the technology perfected during a prehistory of prehistory, or are they the result of a contingent environmental or ecological arrangement? These questions are both activated and withdrawn from our scrutiny by the countless infinitesimal chemical and meteorological transactions that revitalize the paintings and hold them in place, in precisely the same place and condition determined at their nebulous origin. Professor Pettigrew and his colleagues studied 80 of these Bradshaw rock artworks in 16 locations across the Kimberley region. They found that the vast majority of them showed signs of life, but no paint, and these biofilms may explain previous difficulties in dating such rock art. As you know, conventional dating methods rely on dead tissue. Radiocarbon dates dead tissue, and since nothing is dead in the Gion paintings, they appear to have been painted last week. The findings are strangely consonant with the story of the bird. Science, contemporary science, and Aboriginal lore converge in suggesting a continuity of replenishment, the circulation of blood in the veins of those images. I do not wish to intersperse this talk with an ekphrasis, a distant guided tour of the exhibition at Extra City, but I would like to mention that a series of works presented there returned and revolved around the question of lost technologies, of distinct ways of inhabiting and making sense of the world, of instances where information obtained by contemporary science coincides with primitive ritual. Most striking among these is a documentary by the French filmmaker Jérôme Blumberg, attempting and failing to account for the fact that the Dogon in Mali have always known something that has been only recently detected by astronomy. That another paradigm of celestial observation, allowed by a particular geological formation, a cave that they employ as an astronomical observatory, led them to obtain the same knowledge a long time ago, to obtain the same knowledge as did the most recent telescope, the largest extension ever built, the largest extension of human sight. Is it art? But is it art? The question haunts the chronological extremities of this our discourse. It is repeatedly echoed in the public reception of modern art. Anyone, it is said, could reverse the position of a urinal. My child could do the scribbles that seem to form this or that abstract painting. This goes all the way to propositions that consciously tests art that consciously tests art's self-definitions and epistemological anxieties? Is it art recurs in archaeological studies that speculate on the possibility that the carving of a stone or the application of pigment on a rock wall or one's own body does not necessarily overlap with the role we assign to art today? That each artifact left behind by prehistory is an invitation to imagine another sensorium and another iconology, another alignment of gestures of togetherness and understanding, of practices by which the world is brought within reach. Between the two occurrences of the same question lies a vortex of timelines and ways of art making. The second question might be a distorted echo of the first. What will follow is an attempt to work through the enigma of a metabolism where life is breathed into art and vice versa, of a picture that is alive, that preserves itself through symbiosis between constituents and outside the norms of museology and heritage, that has devoured and given birth to itself for the last 40,000 years. Of course, literature about and around art abounds in Pygmalion episodes, moments when works of art cross an ontological threshold and come alive, or conversely, where they suck their makers or their viewers into their own spectral terrain. I am choosing Goya's rendition of Pygmalion and Galatea because it shatters both literally and figuratively the elated iconography of this moment that has led to an almost uninterrupted succession at Goya's time of representations of the moment of caress, of representations of this transgression, where a block of ivory becomes a woman and is capable of embracing its maker. Goya intersects this elated iconography with a calculatedly pedestrian, ambiguous ontological placing. Sculpture and statue seem to exist within the same realm. No effort is made to differentiate them, which allows the equally legitimate conclusions that a real woman, rather than a block of ivory, is being remodeled with a chisel, or that the two protagonists immobilize each other within the same fictional domain, where no transgression is actually possible. Of course, a lot could be said about the psychoanalytic role that these moments, these episodes, play for art history, as outlets that diffuse disciplinary tension and embody, make palpable what is otherwise an immaterial relation, the relation between discipline and its objects. Returning to the Guion, there is a discrepancy there that is immediately striking between an ecology of purposes and results, the processes of self-assimilation and renewal that sustain the pictures, and, on the other hand, the dark void to which prehistoric art is confined by conventional art history. An engulfing obscurity interrupted by flashes of intuition and by any other figures of illumination which build up the ampler metaphor of a dawn of consciousness, the tropes of emergence, of transition out of obscurity, of the advent of the visible. Something is amiss at Kimberley, and our instruments of inquiry fail to grasp their targets. Our metaphors harden before they can apprehend their object. There is a mismatch there in terms of sensuous force and conceptual traction. It might be that here we only have metaphors for something that is decisively ametaphorical. These images are brimming with time. They bubble with the material equivalent of the passage of time, which seems to be their principal nutrient. Shall we say nothing in response to their silent self-rejuvenation? To the wordless invitation that they address to us? Are we addressed at all by them? As we know, nothing is really nothing to art history. There is nothing in the territory patrolled by this discipline that did not aspire to be, in some form, plenitude. A plenitude to be recuperated, demonstrated, and made almost tangible. Nothing that had not hoped, with varied degrees of success, to be a revelation. All these instruments, which write the past to the same extent that they write distance between the past and us, feel inadequate in relation to the strange there and now instituted by the Guion. If we are indeed called upon by these paintings, attending to them might be akin to an anabasis, which in the words of Alain Badiou is a free invention of a wandering that will be a return that did not exist as a return route prior to the wandering. The place that one returns to is not exactly the same as that which one left, nor are the ones that do the returning. One point where such an anabasis through the categories of art history might begin is this radical contradiction. The perfect and eminently productive identity between it, the picture, and its corruption, its contamination. What could have been a scenario of loss, of destruction, a foundational lacuna, continues with many other scripts in the history of art that revolve around destroyed, unfinished, stolen, misattributed works, all operations via which pictures threaten to veer out of disciplinary territory, and all fortunate occasions for art history to retrieve them discursively. So what could have been irreversible loss to be deplored and interpreted as trauma is rewritten by the Gion as wholeness. Contamination is the purity. It is the integrity of these paintings. The image and that which would threaten it with destruction coincide in reproduction, in the two senses of the word. The image and that which threatens it actualize each other as equivalent and convergent tools of production and sustenance. We've got the object, and let's say the object covered in molds, and they co-author something that needs to be mapped out. The object and the object, the infested object, a palimpsest of making and unmaking that would normally require the intervention of conservators. This overlap here, they cohabit and continuously form the same image. A question I cannot hope to fully resolve here is how this would translate to the field of meaning, how such a composite would signify, such a hybrid. A composite of intentionality and that which would render that intentionality illegible, confused and anonymous. How does signification here reconcile affirmation and negation, an affirmation whose object is a negation and vice versa? One figure of such reconciliation potentially applicable here is the already mentioned palimpsest, maybe a palimpsest of itself, a mask identical to the face that it covers. Perhaps more productively, we could speculate on this in terms of anamorphosis, the superposition within the same object of two perspectives. In this case, this would not be a spatial, but rather a chronological anamorphosis. In this case, two temporalities and two vectors of meaning overlap. Our pre-formatted understanding of the past and this particular object's recalcitrance, producing in tandem a temporal rapport that cannot be specified once and for all. Our relation to such pictures is perhaps broken into two perspectives. We are both present and absent from a process without becoming, a slowed down, decelerated biography of automorphism. We are necessary and expendable to equal extents, and maybe this is the case with all images, just radicalized by the Gion, solicited and repelled by a history without transformation, interpolated and silenced by a cause endlessly re-engendered as an effect, confronted with a long infinitive for which we are discursively ill-equipped. For the Eastern European mystic, things that resist definition can be apprehended by elimination, by an almost endless accumulation of discursive subtractions, by the almost endless enumeration of all that the object we wish to define is not. God is not a rose brings the mystic one step closer to establishing what God is. This is within the context of Eastern European mysticism. This is apophasis, and we could call it the way of the antonym, where the antonym of the antonym, the other of the other, reveals itself to the mind that looks to the entirety of the world and deducts from it all that the mind did not seek. Neither painting nor sculpture, Gion converge painting and sculpture, contamination and colonization, unknown but equal quantities of art and life, to produce both the biofilm that keeps them intact and the film, in the sense of a making of, an uninterrupted succession of images where light-sensitive particles remodel the paintings into themselves. This is what I mean by automorphism, a process by which transformation is actually a transformation into a replication of a pre-existing identity. Seen as a myriad instances of becoming same, these movements and counter-movements belong to an anachronistic timescape, where stories of becoming and tropes of regularity are punctured by gaps, absences, and switched tenses, but timelines that do not necessarily converge in the present. These paintings are neither our beginning nor the end of something that is not us, neither inauguration nor trace of loss. They are an alien collaboration, awaiting a type of presence from us that is not the secular sacrament of museums, that of uniting origin and present, but the collaboration of all these antonyms. Contamination that is purity, infestation that is integrity, the indistinction of their death and birth, consumption and excretion, the sameness or strangely mimetic relationship between the first cause and the last effect. An invitation, perhaps, to a symmetrical negative archaeology. Something for which we only dispose of an array of metaphors exists by both devouring and giving birth to itself, by feeding on the very connective tissue of metaphor, by inhabiting and blocking the very space of metaphorical transportation. If we see metaphors as the symbolic union between what something is and what something isn't. With the Gion, there is matter upon matter, matter bleeding into matter, as opposed to thought fleeing matter, emancipated from it. So can we think with and through the oxymoron of art and life embodied by the Gion? Can we think with Graham Walsh and the Aboriginals, refusing one toxic stance and not having access because of cultural barriers to the other? The local, within inverted commas, level of reading is equally susceptible to allegorical extrapolation, to either romancing the Aboriginal or to understanding these paintings in contrast to dire political circumstances, as a counterpoint, as a counterbalance to the political and cultural strategies via which Aboriginals are both cast into and evacuated from the role of illustrating an uninterrupted line uniting prehistory and the present. They are both endowed with history and savagely dispossessed of it. I shy away from what is an extraordinarily fraught political territory, one that I only know from a distance, but I would like to venture an intermediate proposition. Paintings thought of neither locally nor universally, thought so that an abstract subjectivity is wrested from them to be our interlocutor and maybe disprove our claims and certainties. A model, perhaps, for antipodean thought, for intercepting and responding to a distant call, for instituting a dependency to something that does not affect us, for working one's way through impossibly elongated, messy strings of causes and effects. If such an abstract subjectivity is to be identified here, let's see what kind of economy of gestures it operates with, how in its inoculation of the wall there is more of the less, an overflowing of insufficiency and the diminution of excess, how a delicate balance within the bacterial colony and within the contours of art comes about at the intersection of too much and too little, of lichen and bare wall. There are maybe two very different kinds of human stroke on the mineral surface of our planet. On the one hand, there is the mineral-to-mineral stroke, whereby a stone is brought with force and intention upon the face of a rock, resulting in a spark and the most mineral beginning of fire. On the other hand, there is mineral-to-biological stroke, in which stone and softer instruments are brought to the rock face to mark a space where the response of those uncontrollable, non-human life forms, our co-conspirators, may be expressed. Microbes are multifarious, invisible force animating our living planet. More than 9 in every 10 of us, whether counted as mass, number of species, or functions essential to maintain the world as we know it. We have oxygen because there are microbes, and the respiration of each of our cells can only happen because of our mitochondria. Descendants from an ancient microbial lineage with whom our ancestors struck an intimate symbiotic agreement millions of years ago. The ancestors of those who would become our ancestors, we, people of the line-drawn word, were already being accustomed to the flash speed and immediate fire of the mineral spark, ultimately the same spark which illuminates today the screen on which these words are inscribed. On the other hand, another humanity existed, a humanity which drew from the slower pace and relative unpredictability of the biological mediation between human intention and the mineral vocation of the planet. There are many differences between these two sibling phyla. One dominates the planet today and encounters, as matter in the wrong place, traces of another mitochondrial behavior. It museifies, it mines or it cleanses the traces of its lost twin, its diaphanous mineralogy, its breath crystals, stratigraphic imprints of exhalations and hesitant convexities produced by inhalation. If this instance of prehistoric art knew what it was doing, and I think it is clear by now that I choose to believe that as opposed to dismissing this instance as an accident, then it must be endowed with a prehistory of its own. What that it interrupts, it etches into stone, into an alive tombstone perhaps, or one that it rechannels into other temporalities, going towards us and away from us, other temporal distances and gaps that complicate the story of how the visible world became the locus of a certain mode of sense-making. Another recent discovery in the South African cave of Blombos unearthed what appears to be a painting kit that is 100,000 years old. A 1.5-page news report on this features no less than 6 occurrences of the word modern and 5 of the word abstract, descriptors that had been previously refused to Neanderthals, capturing here cognitive advancements, but advancements from which other pre-modernity, and the capacity of people 100,000 years ago to use substances in a symbolic way. All the chemical, material, and gestural stages in the making of pictures, the application of paint on body, wall, or animal skin are mirrored in the sequence of these objects. Used in the order in which they were abandoned, they would have facilitated something that is not there, that is the absence of a picture. I will return to this point in a second. First, I would like to note that with this other temporal bridge of the 100,000-year-old painting kit, the question of modernity, of when we started becoming who we are today, keeps receding into the past. With all these new findings, the paradoxical novelty of the very old, or of the impossibly old, our modernity is posed a progressively larger, older, and more intricate question of its own sources, of the cause and effect that led to the first cause and effect, of the first thing before the first things, the chronological converse of the messianic destiny, the idea of progress, of a climactic moment, and of an exit from history, where we would inspect, take delight in, or be crushed by the last things after the last things that modernity has abandoned. This compulsion of the inaugural moment is still there, a crossing into the human, a turning away from what the human is not. Returning to the point I began to formulate earlier, to postulate that the Gion artist did not know what he or she were doing is analogous with the traumatic reading of the painting kit at Blombos, a reading that implies that something, danger, terror, loss, disorientation, the forces of nature, or a large beast, any other form in which an overpowering material world could have manifested itself, intervened between the painter and the task of painting, and precluded the symbolic leap. What if at Blombos, the painter simply did not paint, for reasons other than inability? Can we allow him or her that privilege of not functioning dutifully within our productive mindset? Or must he or she be forever captive in the violent event that prevented that painting's existence, and that equates the evidence of a set of instruments with the absolute necessity of an image? Are we conditioned to ventriloquize our ancestors, to rescue them from their own aimlessness and teach them to feel, think, and speak, so that our present can begin to rehearse its phrases, dreams, and provisional conclusions in the past, so that we can begin to be who we are? If that other abstract subjectivity that the Gion intimate and animate exists in an idiosyncratic history, maybe that history is a collection of non-beginnings and non-ends. A construction where a negative prefix is added to anything that would work as an emblem of an inauguration or the effigy of a demise, appending any suggestion of a fixed framework of chronology and teleology going hand in hand. Animated tombstones and forged birth certificates, epitaphs as forewords, postscripts to preambles. I will show a few images and discuss briefly a text. The 3 images and the texts, I think, create a map for this abstract subjectivity. A map where the cardinal points are displacements of bodies and smudges and stains of colors, contorted times, and monstrous identities. The first thing I will try to do is discuss the question of time, and I would like to situate the idiosyncratic now of the Gion, the warped timeline by which images possibly made 40,000 years ago are also made now, between the temporal deflections enacted by two other images. One of them by Lucas Cranach. In the case of Cranach's picture, our encounter with the painting happens too soon, before the work has completed its progress towards obliteration. In the other case, the painting of Tommaso Lauretti, we're too late. We've arrived to the work just after the apparition of the painting, just after the apparition that the painting renders as presence. This is called The Triumph of Christianity over the Pagan Idol, and was completed by Tommaso Lauretti in 1585. It fills the ceiling of the Hall of Constantine in the Vatican, and is the Counter-Reformation response to the Sistine Chapel, the nearby Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. The two figures in the Triumph, the shattered, pulverized statue of Apollo and the crucifix that now sits atop the pedestal previously occupied by Apollo, never cease to appear to each other, to play themselves as opposed and inseparable. Absence has accelerated into immediacy, and the atmospheric pressure of this mutation made marble give way. The viewer has just missed the obliteration of Apollo's statue, an act of obsolescence, art history in convulsive making. This is a dialectical image, at least in the sense of admitting an anteriority, a before that it expedites into oblivion, demonstrating the truth of its own idea of the future. One figure in this non-allegory is equipped with the past, while the other institutes a past. The spatial efficacy of the crucifixion, which could have taken the figure anywhere in pursuit of any task, is put to pedagogical use. Its capacity to unsettle the other sculpture becomes a museological function, so that its ability to pulverize Apollo is both proven and held in check, so that the traces of Apollo's sculpture remain recognizable as such. The two actors are scaled and calibrated in relation to each other and to the successful demonstration of how different objects are affected by the passage of time. History appears as both materially demonstrable and as unfolding at an imperceptible remove. This is the image to which we have arrived too soon. Like the Gion, a non-beginning and a non-end, this is the martyrdom of Saint Catherine, painted in 1506 by Lucas Cranach. This is the highest resolution image I could obtain from the Budapest collection where this image is held, but unfortunately does not convey the visual mechanism of the work. I will count on the support of your imagination in mapping that out. Saint Catherine is about to be martyred, but so is the picture itself. Divine wrath rips the sky open, revealing a pitch-black nothingness that is about to consume the world. The wheel on which Saint Catherine is about to be tortured explodes, cracks open, and bursts into flames. This annihilation of the instrument and place of torture is paradoxically simultaneous with the blotting out of the painting itself. As if we were viewing the painting through a lens on which a layer of ash settles progressively, a layer of ash rendered as an act of erasure, an attempt to cross out apprehension. You notice throughout the painting, on the horse, on the sky, and the darker backgrounds make that slightly more visible. Gray dots begin to cover the surface of a painting, another surface than the pristine, perfect surface of what appears to be Lucas Cranach's representation of the martyrdom, a subsequent episode to something that happens after the martyrdom will have occurred. The grey shower begins to obscure the apocalyptic scene. These aggressive, multiplying blots cover the scene and do not really register in reproductions. When seen face to face, The grey dots appear like minute scrolls of growing density and intensifying violence. They also look like the work of another painter, motivated by an urgency entirely other than picturing martyrdom. So the now of the painting intersects the future death of Saint Catherine and the present obfuscation of that image. We're there in the nick of pictorial time. There's enough evidence of Cranach's mastery and enough evidence of the painting's progress towards a grey gestural monochrome, where ashes vandalize the painting's splendid surface, where they will accumulate in sufficient thickness to obscure the scene, as if, say, Willem de Kooning had begun to erase a Cranach painting. The scene and its removal are demonstrated and balanced, calibrated once again to show how two temporalities cohabit the image. With anachronic instruments, we could refer to this as a collage of stills from two different films, the superposition of two projections. Like our primordial artist, Cranach paints antimimetic space, where past and future do not function as each other's uninterrupted conduit. The observer and the observed are implicated in a temporal configuration which cannot be specified once and for all. Another image that resists reproduction. The idea of a whole that is broken into myriad instances of becoming and sameness made me think of Mexican artist Teresa Margolles, to whose practice I am in general ambivalent. This untitled intervention, once again beyond reproduction, has been performed in a variety of places, but the incarnation that I saw was at Museum in Bolzano, a building that is conceived as a transparent temple of political communality. It is erected by a bridge that separates the two communities, Italian and German, that make the fabric of the city and that have a relatively inimical relationship. The museum functions as a window, a glass temple for their reciprocal examination and reconciliation, so that political frictions are alleviated in a play of multiplying reflections. The work I will refer wields all the tropes that Margolles' art is famous for, but if these tropes, images or fragments of brutality that are imported almost like commercial goods from Mexico City or Ciudad de Juarez, and reassembled in an art space that is repurposed as a museum for civil and social unrest, are in all other cases I am aware of overwhelmingly present, often to the detriment of the work. Here they register as the faintest obstruction, as a thin veil of translucence that interrupts the democratic metaphors of the venue. You see, I think, slight, almost imperceptible smudges on the windows. Windows of the museum were rubbed patiently, gently, over the entire duration of the exhibition with t-shirts, used, dirty, anonymous black t-shirts brought from Mexico, leaving indistinct smudges of sweat, grease, and bacteria on the glass. This was an infinitesimal intrusion in the mutual visibility that buttresses symbolically the multicultural functioning of the city. This was the film of a distance in both senses of the word. A film as a somewhat alien surface, an addition, a disquieting surplus, but also film as a function of framing a dynamic montage. Margolles' work was a metonym for the selves of conflict and immigration, of death and violence, drug wars and precariousness, displacement and grim statistics, registering in an entirely alien space through the distant imprint of their muscular activity, their hindered mobility, their incapacity to extract themselves from threatening situations, through the overlaid traces of their spastic gestures towards an exterior point. Those gestures form a mass of smears, and if the intervention succeeds, it does so because it does not provide those bodies and stains with sanitized, artistically constructed, curatorially sustained, and negotiated identities. Individual testimony is replaced by anonymous, anguished mark, blotting out with grease and the blur of corporeal collectivity, the interstices between identities and the political entities that those identities sustain or oppose. My last fourth cardinal point on this map of mixed media scribbles and onslaughts, or maybe the exhibition guide for this imaginary juxtaposition, could be Balzac's novella The Unknown Masterpiece. "Your good woman is not badly done, but she is not alive," says Balzac's Fraunhofer to Porbius, the first indication of the wavering foundation on which the novella is built. Fraunhofer fails to capture life in a painting, or succeeds in rendering life as a muddled mass of layered paint. The story is recounted in 1845, not long after painters like Lagrenet and Girodet were churning out their countless grandiloquent Pygmalions. In 1845, at the threshold of historical abstraction, or rather before that threshold had announced its imminent occurrence. In the novella, abstraction is denounced as a failure, but rereading it today, we might sense that abstraction is subtly preempted by Balzac, that abstraction can never be purified of likeness, that abstraction, however intransigent, is always appraised against a figure, or assumed to figure a particular life form, even if skeletal, disincarnate, or all over, that is supposed to be somehow, even if abstractly, alive. A lot happens in Balzac's art historically hyperactive texts. The warm breath of life comes and goes into that splendid body. Beauty, a severe and unapproachable thing, is both won and lost by the intrepid lover who works out his painterly desire so quickly in brief, impatient jerks that it seemed to young Poussin as if some familiar spirit inhabiting the body of this strange being took a grotesque pleasure in making use of the man's hands against his own will. There is an overabundance of whispers and touches, breaths, drops and bulges, muscular tension and indirect glances that permeate the story, and compose something of an anatomic infrastructure for the text, a film of convulsions, moments of diabolical intensity and desolate languidness. Porbius, Fraunhofer, Poussin and Gillette all progressively become bodies in the story of art incarnate. They are all brought into presence as the unknown masterpiece is removed from that regime of experience. All characters blush at some point in the story. They all arrest momentarily the flow of blood in the incandescence of their cheeks. You're surely familiar with the end of the story. "There's a woman beneath," exclaims Porbius, calling Poussin's attention to the coats of paint with which the old artist had overlaid and concealed his work in the quest of perfection. The most perfect foot ever painted emerged from a confused mass of scrolls, from a wall of amorphous paint. Art was supposed to vanish, to incarnate in its own absence or undoing, in the form of a living girl. Instead, it is obstructed by a screen of gestural marks, drenched and suffocated in layers of paint. Painting was to be a veiled flush, vascularized flesh, pulsating reality thinly disguised by the canvas. But the canvas remains a cover and a shroud, disclosing only that perfect foot. The canvas will be promptly incinerated so that the story can end. In the following decades, French illustration and caricature begins to respond to the same desire, or maybe to the same secret fold in the zeitgeist. Ironic monochromes and abstract paintings abound, and you're probably familiar with the series made by the caricaturist Alphonse Allais, a series of representational blanks. They are representation, but they are monochromes. They're black, white, blue, and yellow. The red one is titled Apoplectic Cardinals Harvesting Tomatoes on the Shore of the Red Sea. But a more interesting example, I guess, is Gustave Doré, comes from Gustave Doré. This is a page from his History of Holy Russia, realized in 1854. The caption to this image reads, "As in the following century, a series of rather colorless events continued to unfold, I feared, dear reader, that I would make you averse to my work by burdening you with tedious drawings. Yet my editor, as the conscientious man that he is, has keenly recommended to leave the indicated slots in order to prove that a capable historian can level things off without forgetting anything." The page is preceded by another monochrome, a black mass, which are the Ténèbres, from which the history of Russia emerges, and is followed by a red one, representing, without the tedium of actually depicting amputated bodies, the bloodbath of the reign of Ivan the Terrible. with eyes half closed, we will only retain a general impression of that epoch, a river of red paint covering the page. Coming back to the notion of genealogical imagination, the discourse that performs a permanent transit between things and the ideas that they stand for, I will briefly mention the work of South African archaeologist David Lewis Williams. He takes contention in his revolutionary The Mind in the Cave with the ex nihilo moment when a brain becomes a mind, the transubstantiation through which thinking matter is achieved. Concomitant, we assume, with the moment when matter itself, the residue of matter which could not become a brain, stopped thinking. He speaks about cave artists hijacking intelligence from the shape of the rock, constantly reinvesting the act of touching the stone, caressing it with hands or lips, blowing pigment against it to create the organic communion of negative handprints, or to conjure animals that seem to jut out of the wall. The writer thinks through the topography of the cave as an elaborate choreography of rituals, torches, shadows, recesses, and shamanistic acts. All these amount to a kind of sensuous sociology, or perhaps to an iconology of the cave. Doubling the mind in the cave with the cave in the mind, and trying to map out how they carved each other out, simultaneously and of the same material, Williams' study cannot avoid what seems to be a truly inescapable fallacy. The mind in the cave cannot be but ours, with the cave as origin and thus as terminus point. This, I would argue, is the allegory of prehistory, or prehistory as an essentially allegorical site of enunciation. Our ancestors are both excessively material and incompletely spiritual. They are not themselves, they cannot be themselves, they do not have the instruments of identity, but they are us, our lesser selves, in rudimentary disguise and incomplete attire. As in any conventional allegory, they speak about us and to us, even if in incomprehensible idiom. They speak allegorically about us and about something that they cannot refer directly, the dimly perceived horizon of who we will become. In parenthesis, the converse drive that would glorify prehistory as a wholeness, the wholeness to which we have lost the plenitude that we have been evacuated from, and cast us as the lesser selves of prehistory, does not break, but only reverses in direction and ideological orientation the allegorical mind. The counter-argument formulated to this at the Guion site is that there is perhaps another mind in and near the cave, a mind that we have forgotten, written, or allegorized our way out of. So how can we evade this dilemma? How can we imaginatively institute something or something else than ourselves at the other end of prehistory? Can we allow prehistory to speak in its barely audible terms? Can we not put words in its mouth? Can we suspend ourselves from evolutionary diagrams and possibly conclude that we are contemporaneous with the conclusion that prehistory did not draw from the material and spiritual premises that it works with, that our present is that which prehistory never became? If this is one side of the allegorical coin, could this have consequences of how we conceive our own future? Can not knowing where we come from have something to say to our not knowing where we are headed? Two ways of seeing and missing the same object, two ways in which our historiographic instruments fail us, and it's in this context that I would like to introduce this portrait. This is Polyphemus, tricked by Odysseus, painted by Tischbein in 1802 and exhumed by Adorno and Horkheimer in their Dialectic of Enlightenment, as once again the figure of that which we have forever lost to be who we are linguistically and morally. Linguistically, because Polyphemus screams that he has been blinded by nobody, which is Odysseus' trickster name, and morally, for all the consequences that this disjunction has, this disjunction between names and selves, the effacement of words in order to mint concepts. I confess I am not sure about the iconography here. I could not elucidate the question of the eyes. Cyclops are normally created, born with one eye, but the painting here suggests that stereoscopy was abandoned or withdrawn from this creature as punishment or as a way of visualizing another way of seeing and being. Polyphemus is a cannibal, a central figure in the European construction of morality, lurking at the periphery of a sterilized, hygienic, modern world of representations. The coming into being of the cannibal implies the disappearance of other beings, hence the permanent metaphysical unease that accompanies these constructions, the institution of the cannibal and the definition of the cannibal's antonym. If wonder is the source of knowledge, then disgust with the cannibal is the source of morality, its food of thought, its food for thought. Morality digests the cannibal. The cannibal is an anarchic subject, an actor in an impossible community. He feeds on community and practices a form of anti-politics. Nature at its worst, he is the atom of an impossible social order, an organization whose structure and replenishment coincides fully with dissolution. Defeated by polysemy, Polyphemus is another stone left behind, another obstacle circumvented, so that reason, in alliance with cunning, can flee forward, can be liberated or abstracted from the cave. Within the same mythological spectrum, the opposite of the cannibal is Pallas Athena, the founder of democracy, excised from Zeus's, her father's divine head. This is the converse of cannibalism, extracting body from body, intellect from intellect, as opposed to the gluttony of assimilating body into body. This is Leonard Kern, Cannibal Woman, 1650, and reproduces a troubling consubstantiality, I think, of that which constitutes and feeds the subject. A paradox that is sculpted in ivory, like Galatea in Ovid's account, which we must assume was Pygmalion's impossibly small lover. Hair, nails, teeth, limbs, and pedestal are all made of the same material, ivory, which does allow the hypothesis of a scene that is capable or about to devour itself in its entirety. Predictably, given the title of the exhibition project, the second archaeologist I would like to refer to is Plato, specifically the passage in the Republic, where Socrates doubts that children can distinguish between what is an allegory and what is not, and doubts that a pedagogy based on the former is tenable. He proceeds to tell Glaucon another story, a real allegory this time, which is the famous allegory of the cave. This parable is real rather than purely allegorical, because it is in some way an attempt at writing prehistory at the time of Plato, an anteriority from which Olympian gods are absent. They are not invoked in order to grant legitimacy, to institute the mythological foundations of knowledge and citizenship. Of course, the allegory of the cave is a political rather than mythological scenario, an atheist one too, but a foundational myth nonetheless, with a metaphysical side instead of the godly emblem. Plato's shadow theater and liberation from its function as meiotics in reverse gear. The text extracts a cause from an effect and inquires into origin, into foundations rather than ideals, foundations that it then sets in an allegorizing environment. It sketches a scenario for knowledge outside the contract between God and man. It does not name the master of the emancipated slave. It does not indicate who had barred knowledge from those who eventually may come to obtain it. The allegory of the cave is the foundational myth of European thought to the same extent that Lascaux is the foundational myth in the self-perception of European art. Lascaux, today only to be seen by the initiated, might be interpreted as a reversal of Plato's allegory, a spatial and philosophical descent reserved exclusively to the custodians of knowledge. Another reversal that I will mention in passing is that the birth of painting, as recounted by Pliny, employs positive shadows rather than Plato's negative ones, there's a positive negative relationship between these two moments of origination in knowledge and painting. Painting is born when Buddha's marks on the wall as reminder the shadow profile of her departing lover. But coming back and insisting a little bit on Lascaux, Lascaux is also its own antonym, implicated in a process of negative replication, by which origin is progressively removed, or rather outgrows the confines of an originating event. You probably know the story that when visitors flocked to the cave to witness the birth of art, in the recently accidentally discovered cave of Lascaux, the encounter between the bodies of paintings and those of the visitors had an unforeseen consequence. In conjunction with changes in the climatic conditions that had sheltered the paintings, microorganisms carried in the breath of visitors infected the works, which began to deteriorate. Sealed up in 1963, Lascaux was replicated in an artificial excavation, modeled with 500 tons of concrete and ornamented with reproductions of the original paintings. Lascaux II opened in 1983. Its parking is on top of Lascaux I. Archaeologist Rowan Wilken reports a recent twist in the microbiological plot. New microorganisms, a new generation, brought to Lascaux II by new generations of visitors, are beginning to have the same harmful effect on the copied paintings, progressively encrusted with the formlessness of algae and calcite. It is likely that Lascaux II will close, so that its copies, seen by more people than the originals, will be protected. This might lead to the creation of Lascaux III, or to an exclusively digital existence for the paintings. In these circular motions between heritage in jeopardy and its safeguarding, producing more and more distance between us and that which is being salvaged, the story of Lascaux binds the spectral opposites of artistic experience, the cave and the museum. Lascaux II was one of Jean Baudrillard's prime examples of the ecstatic life and bad eternity of the simulacra, of duplications that render both original and copy artificial. Now, with the return of green leprosy and white disease, this, according to Wilken's account, is the language employed by French conservators, Lascaux II could come to represent the hyper-real par excellence, a replica so convincing in its mimesis that it fulfills even its own conditions of destruction. Copies, as we know, are only copies if they have a falsifying flaw, a trace of disinformation which authenticates them as representations, as copies. This is a still from a 4-hour film we are presenting at Extra City right now, titled Route Sedentaire. The artists are the Dutch duo Lonnie van Brummelen and Sybren de Haan, and they, I think, give quite a striking response to this interweaving of strange copied origins. The plot of the narrative of the film is that a copy of Hermes by Praxiteles, a plaster copy, is bought at the Art Academy in Amsterdam and dragged all the way to Lascaux. So a copy of our ideals of harmony and order, be they aesthetic or political, is used as chalk, literally, as an instrument to draw a line of passage between one site of origin and the other, knowing that at the end of the route there will be another copy, the copy of Lascaux II. Modernity's desire for the cave is possibly a symptom of a blank screen syndrome, of a desire for pure passivity that Lorraine Dalston traces throughout the history of science and theology. Their image-making devices or metaphors. The dream of pure passivity haunts epistemology, religion, and sexual reproduction. God speaks through the saint, semen imprints itself upon uterine matter, empiricist philosophers and scientific experimenters start from a mental tabula rasa. The seal imprints itself in serviceable wax. Female matter is formed by male seed. A scene is etched by light into photographic emulsion. A slide is projected onto a white screen, all patient media which bear their message without murmuring or meddling. The cave participates in this amniotic imaginary. The first days and nights of soul-making, when words and pictures are mixed with animal fat, as a stage for the first rehearsal of the modern ruptures, the echoes of which will become louder and louder into the 20th century. In the case of the Gion, the support is active. The screen is not blank. The wall participates in the constitution of the image, and an imprint is fashioned at the intersection of pigment, feed-ahead, and sculptural feedback of the support. Together, they form the conjunctive tissue, where an encrypted message is permanently enunciated. As a distant counterpart to this, documentary images of a performance organized in 1975 by Italian artist Fabio Mauri, titled Intellectual, with/on Pier Paolo Pasolini. The performance was redone shortly after Pasolini's assassination. This was a 1 hour and a half screening of Pasolini's The Gospel According to Saint Matthew on Pasolini's chest. Pasolini is blinded by the light of the projector, while the audience participating to the event sees very little because of the size of the screen and its anatomical deformations. I find quite striking the kind of intimacy that is created there between blinded creator and unseeing audience, a form of intimacy that is devoid of a cultural transaction. No cultural meaning, no cultural content is actually transacted, is actually exchanged in the performance. But a form of intimacy sustains the event throughout the duration of the film and strangely reactualizes an older meaning of film, that of interrupted light, interrupted here by the body of its maker. Allegory suggested itself as a rhetorical mechanism for an exhibition that was separated from its pretext by incompressible distances, both geographical and otherwise. In the words of Antwerp-born literary critic Paul de Man, allegory persists in performing what it has shown to be impossible to do. One of art's foremost figural machines, allegory is a dynamic metaphorical assemblage intimating that which lies beyond the scope of representation. Two stories unfold simultaneously at the two sides of a wall of correspondence, each aware of the other's existence and of the necessity of a fracture, of a temporary mutual invisibility. Allegory lives plural, contradictory lives in recent literary or artistic theory, but none of its recent reformulations obscured entirely allegory's prime function, to say that which cannot be said, to utter that which cannot be addressed directly. To what extent is the notion of allegory still a productive critical tool in relation to the fragmentary narratives and case studies through which today's art invokes convulsive identities or unpresentable realities? Which contemporary figurative incapacities or anxieties could find their allegorical solution? Which other places and other actors, defying representations because they are too vast or too complex, secret or too numerous, dangerously close to the very structure of our symbolic order, might require allegorical intercession or approximation? Allegory encourages readers or viewers not towards some point of some world of perfect fulfillment, but to the realization of the limited world that they are a part of a world from which parts of other worlds can be obliquely detected. And somewhat allegorically, the contemporary appears easier to define as the sum of the emergencies and potentially deadly gridlocks towards which it accelerates, rather than in itself. If the project does indeed activate the notion of allegory, I think this happens between an etymological understanding of its elsewhere, of its other means and other voices, the reversal of that figural process, the converse of allegory, and the possibility of a new construction that emerges from this contradiction. This admittedly brackets, ignores, does not pay sufficient attention to the pursuits of literary theory or postmodernism's frantic hybridization, even if Walter Benjamin, Paul de Man, or Craig Owens have crucial things to say about the genre and its many mutations. Rather, the project employs allegory as a way of holding together slippages in identity, of thinking about wholes that are strengthened or debilitated and extended by their gaps, of interrogating objects that do not get subsumed into stable equations, not without a reminder that cannot be fully tamed. As it is clear by now, I am interested in situations where synonyms and antonyms co-produce other realities, lexical and existential. This co-production might in itself be an internal allegory within the object, such as the oxymoron of art and life of those Australian paintings, a bind where each element, human or not, familiar or strange, discloses the other as constitutive of its own difference. I will leave you with a series of images that should not move but do, of objects that should not be moved but are. Constantin Brancusi's very little known films, of which 3 fragments will be shown here, function as an almost ironic counterpart to the quasi-mystical self-image that the artist crafted for himself. The world of primitive archetypes and figural monads sketched in his exercise of self-historicization. The still, meticulous composure of the work is perturbed when sculptures are poked around with sticks, begin to rotate around their axes, or wobble on their pristine plinths. Or when the studio, the site of so many rehearsals in classical arrangement or total installation, becomes a set for choreographic improvisation. Cinematic motion and the inexplicable, impish life that activates his filmed sculpture seems to me to constitute another interpretive trajectory into the practice, with abstract figures enlivened by the gaze of the camera, but also by a lack of decorum, a movement of the hand or a finger swipe, a gestural parasite, an antonym. Solemnity and playfulness obstruct each other, illuminate each other in this mutual hindrance. Thank you very much.